Students come in all shapes and sizes. As teachers, we address the needs when children enter their first Mommy and Me class or when they attend their first day of school. But students also come to us as fully grown adults with their own unique set of learning goals and needs. Now, those needs and the methods by which we can best meet those needs will be the focus of our conversation today. Welcome to Topics in Education. I'm Jan Weitzel, your host. And with me today are Dr. John Henschke and Dr. Susan Eisenberg, assistant professors in the School of Education. Our topic today, the 5 building blocks of adult learning. Thank you, Susan and John, for being on our show today.
Thank you for having us.
I'd like to start with just having you talk to us a little bit about your own background and how it is that you came to become interested in the field of adult education. Let's start with you, Susan.
Well, I have been with Lindenwood here for a year and a half as a supervisor of graduate research. I received my PhD in education with a focus on the adult learner and education technology back in 2005. I worked in healthcare for about 30 years as a registered nurse, but with a focus on teaching and learning of adults in healthcare, and was a critical care instructor, and then ran a training and development center within healthcare, and worked on a large transformation project right before I left to come to academia. Worked as an adjunct professor at University of Missouri St. Louis, and then came here as a full-time professor.
And John?
My background is a little bit varied. I was in the ministry 55 years ago. The first of this month I was ordained originally in the Baptist Church, and then 31 years ago I received the ordination, went through the ordination process with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And that was what I would call the first call of the Lord upon my life, and the second one came to go into adult education. That's been about 40 some years ago, and I was involved with the University of Missouri in extension exclusively for 13 years, and then a split appointment with University of Missouri St. Louis and University of Missouri Extension for 26 years, and I just retired from there, and I'm a newcomer to Lindenwood.
Well, welcome. We're glad that you're here, sir.
Thank you.
So why do you believe that this is an important topic to discuss on today's program?
For me, it's a commitment to a life goal. I got into adult education and became more deeply involved in it as the time went along, and inquired into it, the practice of it, and also very, very much into the depths of the research of it.
Now, one of the things that we need to define before we can go any further is how do we use the term adult when we're talking about adult education? So how do you define adult?
Well, the definition that we use in adult education, adult learning, is when a person is responsible for themselves as far as their life is concerned, or parts of their life are concerned. We do not use a chronological definition, or we don't use the legal definition that is used for various things that people are legally able to do at the age of so-and-so. It is that we talk about their being responsible for their own life and taking the initiative.
And so we see then that there's a difference in the way that people who are defined as adults, as you're defining it, learn, and maybe a traditional 18-year-old who's still being sponsored by or supported by mom and dad?
Yes. I mean, if you want to make a general across-the-board definition of that in that particular way, but there are those who are ready for adult learning responsibilities in their teen years.
Sure.
And there are some people that are up in some of the upper ages that have never taken responsibility for themselves in that particular regard. So it varies across the spectrum.
So let's kind of get into this a little bit. Tell me, what is one of the main, or some of the main differences we see in how adults learn and other ages learn?
Well, I think there are 6 major things that I look at in terms of how adults learn different from children, and I'll sort of tick them off for you. As a person grows and develops, they develop and become much more interested in directing their own learning, self-directed notion of taking responsibility, and they want to have something to say about what they are to learn, why they are to learn it. A second thing has to do with, as we grow and develop and mature, we gather a reservoir of experience that becomes a resource for our own as well as other people's learning. A third thing has to do with the needs in adults are much more oriented toward the developmental tasks that they are faced with in their life, such as getting a new job or becoming a parent or getting married or whatever that role confronts them with some things that they have to learn, and the needs are much more along that line rather than based on a certain level of maturation that is looked at as far as children. A fourth thing has to do with adults want to learn something tonight that they can apply in their lives either later tonight or tomorrow. Sure. in their work. A fifth thing is that adults are much more intrinsically or internally motivated rather than being externally motivated as younger people are. And the sixth thing has to do with adults want a reason for learning something that makes sense to them, not just because the teacher said so.
Right. I want to hit on a couple of those. I know the fourth one you mentioned, learning today, something that we can apply tomorrow. Yeah. You know, that's one of the quotations that we use when we talk about our adult learning program, the LCIE program. Mm-hmm. Whenever we introduce a new group of students to the LCIE program, we always tell them the purpose of what they're doing is to take what they're learning in class tonight and apply it to their lives and to their jobs tomorrow. Now, Susan, I know you've got background in this area too. Talk to me a little bit about the intrinsic, extrinsic that John was talking about. Can you give us an example of a student who might be intrinsically motivated as opposed to the extrinsic motivation?
Well, extrinsic motivation would be for a grade, to get through a class. But intrinsic, an example of an intrinsic motivation could be myself. Our son went to University of Illinois in Champaign to play football, and I watched him all through high school play football, and I just would cheer when everyone else cheered. I never knew what was going on, and suddenly he was recruited and was going to be playing college football, and so I really wanted to understand. I had a need to be able to talk to him intelligently after a game and say, I saw how you went around that guy and you did this and you did that, and so I went and found a book, and it was Football for Moms, and I read it, and I was able to talk to him about his plays, and I learned how to watch the ball and not him. And so I was intrinsically motivated because it had to do with my life, my son, and his perception of his mom as being involved in his football career. And I think that's a good example of why people go off to learn something. It's because they need to know it to meet a certain goal in their life or a need within them, and not just for another outside purpose.
Sometimes we have people who come into graduate programs, for instance, to move ahead on their pay scale or to get a better job. So there are those intrinsic and also extrinsic motivators working at the same time. Do you see that in your work, John?
Yes, yeah. The getting a better job or something like that may be referred to in the motivational field as hygiene factors. Okay, it's not that it continues to make them happy, but it keeps them from being unhappy. Okay. Kind of thing. Whereas the intrinsic thing has to do with their own growth and their own satisfaction that they are able to accomplish a new goal that they had never accomplished before, and that's a source of satisfaction.
And I think in the adult education courses, they are showing up, for a degree. so they come to class. But part of adult learning is that they can be involved in planning their own learning. So within the curriculum, they can plan to study in depth certain parts of that course more than in other parts of the course, so that they are meeting a personal interest need that they have to learn something more than everything else in the syllabus. So they can be involved in, they show up for the grade, but they can satisfy personal interests in what they want to focus on in that class.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we look at teachers who come back to get a master's degree, you know, of course they want the pay raise, and of course they want to move ahead on the salary schedule, but also they're trying to find ways of making their classroom more effective. So that'd be an intrinsic, I want to be a better teacher, I want to know how to reach my students. Now, what was the sixth one again, John?
The adults want to have a reason for learning something that makes sense to them, not just because the teacher said you need to learn that.
And so when we know this is a reality, how do you see that playing out in your classroom?
Well, one of the factors that I think is so critical to adults as they come into the educational programs and courses that we have is we seek to get them in touch with their curiosities. What is it you're curious about? When you're coming into this class, what is it you feel like you need to or have to know before you leave this course?
Right.
Okay, and as a result, when we can get them in touch with their curiosities, they begin to develop their whole learning plan around that curiosity, and of course it relates to the subject matter that particular course is connected with. But it's an inner driving force that they have then to accomplish what it is that they want to accomplish.
We want to go ahead and get into the 5 building blocks. I know that's what your area of one of your areas of expertise. So let's begin with building block number 1, John.
The beliefs and notions about adult learners. When I'm preparing people, and I'm preparing myself to teach a group of adults or to facilitate their learning, help them learn, I want to have a pretty good catalog of thoughts about how I view them as adults or as learners. And the 6 assumptions that I ticked off just a little bit ago are some of those things that have to do with my belief system about adults as learners, and I want to make sure that I deal with that as we begin to move and prepare ourselves, and as I prepare myself to do some teaching.
So what's our second building block?
Second building block, what is your perception of the qualities of effective teachers? What is it that has to happen with the people who are preparing or are teachers or are seasoned teachers? What are the things that they need to have some notions about as far as they are concerned, and make sure that they're implementing those things? One of the major factors in one of the pieces of research that I have done has to do with the teacher trust of learners. Mm-hmm. That they need to not only trust themselves to be able to take charge of their own learning and to implement that, but also that they are willing to trust the learners to know what their own goals are, to pursue the things that they feel like they need to have them better prepared for going forward with whatever it is that they are trying to accomplish in their life.
Now, Susan, I know you've worked with adults in an online type of setting. Are there, what are some of the qualities that would fit into this area in terms of online?
Well, I think it's creating a climate of respect, even in an online environment. And it's the language that you use, and it's the respect for their unique contribution, and getting individuals to participate, and never slamming any remarks that someone makes in an online chat, that always accepting of everyone's opinions, or they won't come back. It's not that they're coming to a classroom and sitting in the back, they're just not there. If they get any sense of disrespect in an online environment. So would you want to add anything to that?
I think that's a critical factor, and the climate that is conducive to learning and supporting of learning is what we seek to do, so that they will feel safe, they will feel at ease, and they will be willing to experiment with some new kinds of things that they've never experimented before. They might, after that's over with, they might reflect on it and say, well, that went real well, and I'm going to try that again, or that didn't go as well as I wanted to. Now, how do I need to improve that? But they're in a climate and in a setting that is supportive and is helpful as far as their learning, and that they can move forward with that to build on things that are important to them.
Are you familiar with Angelo and Cross, their book on the classroom assessment techniques?
Yes.
You made me think of that in what you've just said, because one of the suggestions we give to all of our teachers here at Lindenwood is about 4 or 5 week time period to do, what they call that minute message or the muddiest point. To ask the students in the class what is not working, and then be able to say to the class tomorrow, one of the items that you mentioned was whatever it might be, and because it's important to you, that's something I'm going to try in our classroom today. So you let the students know that they were heard, and again, you get that idea of respect, but you're also meeting their needs because they're telling you what their needs are.
They have the opportunity and the responsibility to identify what may be blocking them along the way, and then crafting whatever it is that they need to do in order to overcome that, whatever that block might be.
Exactly.
And in an adult education classroom, there will be those in the classroom who really get it, and there are going to be those who are not getting it. And it's fun to watch the others become the facilitators of the learning, because they will become the teacher, kind of. And we don't like to use that word teacher in adult learning. It's facilitator of the learning process. But all come in and all can learn from each other and can be the teachers, and you just kind of rotate the position of who is the teacher, who is sharing their learning to help others learn. And it takes on a life of its own. And we like to talk about the teacher as a co-learner in education, adult education classrooms. And oftentimes, I know I, as a facilitator of learning, learn more than the students do at the end of a course.
So what about building block number 3, John?
I call it the phases and sequences of the learning process. And that's a practical term for saying what is the theory that guides whatever it is that you're doing. In other words, the idea is how do I think that learning and growth and development take place? What are the elements in that, and what are the phases and the sequences that we need to go through in regard to that. One of my major ones has to do with 8 steps. It's a preparation, it's setting of the climate that's conducive to learning, it is mutually planning what goes on in the course, it is identifying the needs and developing objectives out of there, and designing a pattern of learning experiences that will facilitate that, and the conduct of the learning experience, the actual learning experiences that have been planned, and then evaluating or re-diagnosing what the needs are and going through that cycle in ever deepening circles.
It's sort of similar to one of the lesson plan designs that we always tell our beginning teachers, our old Madeline Hunter design. Right, to always, find a way to get the students involved in the lesson up front, get your objectives, get your learning opportunities, do some assessment at the end.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about now building block number 5.
Well, let me...
Oh, I'm sorry, go back.
Let me go into 4.
Oh, did I skip 4? I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's right.
I thought I was...
That's all right.
Okay.
Teaching tips and learning techniques.
Okay.
That is what kind of techniques are available and are you going to use in order to facilitate and help your learners learn what they need to. You go back to the second item that I did in the 6 items, the reservoir of experiences that becomes reservoir for their own as well as other people's learning. The question is, what kinds of methods and techniques will we use in order to tease out, if you will, and get them to share that experience? You know, if somebody asks a question, the teacher might have a tendency to give all the answers to it,
Right.
and not ask for any suggestions from the rest of the people that are there, the rest of the co-learners, if you will, co-facilitators. Whereas if you can open that up and say, does anybody have anything to say about that? Has anybody had any experience along the line of whatever it might be? Tell us about your experience. And so they can tell about that and contribute that from their own experience. And so there's a give and take and a discussion that moves back and forth and around the room, so that people can feel like that they are supported, and also that their resources and their experience is of value to others that are there, and thus gain some additional confidence. There also is the notion that the teaching tips are numerous, that we can find and use over the period of years. And as we use some of those, we kind of stick them in our arsenal, and we're ready to pick those up. Because the three questions that I ask every time I'm going to facilitate a learning experience: what is my theory about how learning and growth and development take place? What is the design of the various items that I want to have in the learning experiences that I conduct? And what's going on right now that makes me choose this one or that one? And one of my learning design models really has 6 items in it. There are general sessions, there are small groups for a variety of purposes, there's reading, there's recreation, worship, or meditation, and there's individual consultation, counseling and study, and there's some preparatory activity that I think are all part of that.
Let's talk about, in this building block number 4, let's talk about some of the very specific things that we could do. For instance, when you're talking about bringing the adult learner into the conversation, some of the time it's just being able to step back and give them that little bit of wait time. Do you find that?
Yes.
That you ask the question, and as humans we want to fill up that space, but we just need to stand there and wait and count to 10, and eventually someone's going to say something.
Some of the most creative time that there can be in adult learners is the silence. Mm-hmm. And typically we're so used to saying that silence is an indication of nothing is going on, or somebody's not listening, or whatever else. But when you wait, like you indicated, some people can come up with some very creative ideas.
Sure.
Along that line.
Well, and sometimes there are some people that just take a longer time to process. Mm-hmm. And we find in a classroom where the same people are constantly jumping, and it's sometimes necessary to say, Betty, I need you just to hang on. I know you've got a great idea. Let's see if someone else has an idea. Because sometimes it just takes some people a little bit longer to decide exactly what they want to say and how they want to say it.
There's another item that goes with that, and that is when you're in a classroom situation, we try to have a circle so that people are looking
Sure.
at each other's faces rather than looking at the back of each other's heads.
Exactly.
And in looking at those faces, you can pick up some nonverbal cues sometimes, or body movements, that you can pick that up and say, so-and-so, Mary or John or whoever it is, you look like you wanted to say something. Let's hear what that is. And that will be a kind of an invitation and an opening for them to share where they might have been reluctant to otherwise.
And I think there are students, even if you're sitting in a circle, who have a hard time speaking up, speaking in a group, because they're timid. And if you put them in small groups or dyads, just turn to your neighbor and talk about this subject for 2 minutes. And you'll find that they're just chatting up a storm when it's just one-on-one or 3 together. And then the one who is the bravest can speak for the smaller group. But that gives everybody a voice in a class that perhaps normally not everyone would speak. If you use small groups, everyone will speak.
It's all about building the climate that's conducive to learning.
Mm-hmm.
And going with what Susan has just said too, sometimes having the students do that think, pair, share, think about it yourself, share it with a neighbor, or compare it with a neighbor and then share it out loud. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can go to the person who maybe is a little bit more quiet and say, because now they know what they're going to say, it's a safe environment, they've mm-hmm. shared it with somebody else, maybe we can get them to speak up. And once we break that ice, once they are able to know that it is a safe environment, it's more likely they're going to come back the next time.
That's right.
All right, now building block number 5.
I call that implementing the prepared plan. Mm-hmm. The idea is that you've made all these plans. You looked at whatever your beliefs and notions about adults as learners and how you're going to implement that. You focus on what it is that you need to be aware of as to be an effective teacher. You know what your phases and sequences or your learning theory is that's guiding what it is you're trying to do. You've got your techniques and your methods and teaching tips already. And when you walk in the door, when a person walks in the door and has responsibility for teaching mm-hmm. a group of people or facilitating their learning, when they walk in there, I use the metaphor of how are you going to make that valley of dry bones get up and live.
I like that.
Okay, how are you going to bring that to life so that the people that are there are excited about why it is that they have come and that they are going to be able to accomplish that for which they came, even though they weren't terribly clear about that when they walked in the room. They had some kind of internal notion about what they'd like to see have happen. And when they began to actively get involved in the learning process, that's making that getting up and living. It's implementing the prepared plan. And it takes a lot of practice. It's like the first time I ever tried to ride a bicycle. I fell off of it numerous times. And then finally one day I was able to ride that for about 15 feet without falling down. And then I was able to go 25 feet. And it's like that, or it's like a pitcher knowing how to hit the groove and throw strike after strike after strike, that kind of thing. But it takes practice and it takes a continuous working at the art and the science of helping adults learn.
And it's managing that process.
Yes.
And it takes someone with an adult education background to really manage an adult education learning process. Oftentimes you can create the best adult learning experience, but if you hand it off to someone who is a traditional teacher or learner, they may slide it back into, I stand up and I say everything that needs to be said to those who are sitting in the audience. So it's not just creating it, it's managing it. If it can't be yourself, making sure that it's someone who will do as you would do to facilitate it in an adult education manner.
Right.
I know that's one of the things that you're teaching now here at Lindenwood is you're teaching people to teach adult learners.
That's exactly right. Okay, and we have one of our courses is the building blocks of adult learning.
All right, well, we'll have to see if we can get some additional people in there. John, I want to thank you very much for being here and welcome to Lindenwood. I'm glad that you're able to join us.
Thank you so much, and I'm delighted to be here.
And Susan, thank you for everything you do for our doctoral program.
Thank you, Dr. Weitzel.
And I'd like to thank you, our viewers, for joining us in Topics in Education. Please join us next time.